I love my daughter. I do not love the act of parenting. They're very different things.
These are things people don't say. You're not supposed to say, women are really not supposed to say that.
I love this little being. I love her with every fiber of my being, but I don't like being a parent. I don't like the constant process of making lunches and dinners. I don't like the wiping of the butts. I don't like all of that stuff, right? And I've had so many women come to me and be like, thank you for saying that, because I thought it made me a bad mother, that I was separating the two out, right? And I'm like, why? Why does that make me less of a mother by saying, of course I love my kid, but I don't want to do drop off and pick up every day for the rest of my life. Like I'm not the Pinterest mom. No shame to people who do that. It's just not who I am. You don't have to look a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way, prove yourself in a certain way, check all these boxes in order to be a good mom, a good wife, a good woman, a good sister, all this nonsense. It's time for us to start rewriting our own stories. Enough is enough.
Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Brett.
I definitely want to talk about Motherhood Myth. And I appreciate you sharing the book, and I've been following along and watching what you're doing, and it's super interesting. We'll land on it, but it's interesting because my kids are all grown. And my wife, we still are very active in their lives as parents. And my wife is like always going to be a mother, but it was interesting because we're out of the stage where, you're in that kind of early childhood where a lot of mothers in particular are grappling with some of the things that you write about. And it's fascinating, just to look back and see, how some of these dynamics played out. And I feel like probably super unqualified to even talk about that as a man, and as a father, and not having the lived experience of a mother, but, having gone through it with my wife and having talked about it a lot with her. So yeah, I don't know. I just don't usually start at the end of the work, and we'll get back. So what I really like to do on the podcast is show people your journey, your path, your human experience to the work that you're doing now, so that they can take some comfort in that as they go on their own journeys. But it really struck me, just how real and raw and honest, this issue is, this myth.
Yeah.
That mothers, women, in particular, struggle with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate you saying, I feel unqualified. I will say though that, obviously John's read the book as well. And I've had quite a few men reach out to me and say, I really appreciate you writing this candid book because it's been helpful for me as the partner, right, of the birthing woman or my female partner or whatever, and just to be able to put themselves in her shoes, but also to be able to see the dynamics at play as part of these larger systems that we're all involved in, right? And just my big impetus for writing this was just so that we had a broader understanding of how these like dominator systems that we are all raised within impact our ability to parent and partner in a healthy way. And so, I do hope that even as a man or as a father, people are taking away like ahas or insights into a little bit of like how we're puppeteered in a way, and then maybe what to do about that. So that was kind of my hope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do have a pretty strong passion and kind of a growing desire and interest in the myths in general, right? Because there are so many. In fact, it sort of seems like it's sort of all a myth, right? That you have these generational, societal, familial patterns, traumas, belief systems, right? That becomes so a part of the ethos that it almost just seems like it's fact, that there really is no other option. And I see it, from a male perspective, in my own life. And certainly I see it in a younger generation that often, is coming to me for mentorship or whatever else, as they struggle. But there's no question it's just not a gender issue. They're specific within the genders. The issues might be specific, but there's so much of how we're supposed to be that really weighs on people. And again, I think it's really why it's important to bring these myths, outward, so that people can go, oh no, wait a minute. I've been feeling like that too. I didn't know that there was another option, or that other people felt this way.
Which is why I wanted to do it, right? It's like put words to things. When we put words to things, we inherently take the shame out of them. So I think it's important for people. I know for me, the idea of how did we get here was the crux of so much of it. I think when people understand how did we get here, and they see the way that so much of this is constructed, and that, we are kept, and this isn't a gender thing, this is all of us, we are kept in this cycle of shame and this cycle of control as a way to be more controllable, to be kind of at service to these larger systems, capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, colonialism, right? When I started unpacking a lot of that and going, oh shit, what it helped me do was, number one, depersonalize it. So it was like, oh, I'm not broken. I'm actually having a very normal response to a system that's broken, right? So that helped me step a lot out of the shame. But then it also helped me go, oh, well, screw that. To your point, I didn't sign up for this. And so I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to unpack this, or I'm going to try to unlearn this. And in a way, that becomes like an act of rebellion. It becomes like its own form of advocacy or of activism, right? And so it became bigger than me in a way. And I know a lot of women, mothers in particular, who have read the book, done the book club, all the things, have said they feel like emboldened now to dismantle some of this, right? Because it does feel like a form, again, of activism where they can put a lot of that fire and a lot of that energy. I think a lot of the conversations that I've seen on social media and in books out there have given a lot of fire, and they've given, kind of fanned the flames. And I think that's great. But then a lot of them stop there. They don't really say like, okay, now what? What do I do with that anger? And so I really hoped in this, I could give you some of that. Like, yeah, you actually should be pissed because this isn't your myth, to use that word, right? This was handed to you, but you also need kind of tangible, practical tools to do the work to kind of dismantle it and not pass it down so that it continues in those generational, familial, lines of trauma.
Yeah, and this is, so for those that don't know, John Kim is your husband. John's been on the podcast a couple times. I smile when I say he's your husband because, I remember when you guys were not married and then like all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, they're getting married, It's great. I don't know why it struck me, but what I love about what you both do is because this is something that again, I've been feeling more and more called to, this idea of using your life experience, right? You have these experiences and you're learning from them. Oftentimes you're suffering through them. You're struggling through them. They're hard life experiences and you have to move through that. Hopefully there's healing involved with that. Right. And then you see that can be very purposeful and ultimately can be very much in service of other people. And I think, that's what you just described and what this book really says to me, including this piece you just talked about where you're activating, there's people are responding to you sharing this experience and then you're giving them, beyond just sharing your experience, you're giving them a new script, a new framework, a new set of tools, right? And to me, this just seems to be what I think maybe the whole gig is, like heal, share, right? And like collectively in community. And I just think it's like pretty a pretty killer example of maybe what we're meant to be doing with our lives.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think I do this with most of my work, but I try really hard to make it clear, I'm not the expert on anybody else's life but my own, if you will, and I'm barely the expert of that. I don't like the whole model that we have now with therapy and therapists, which kind of put us on a pedestal, and somehow people think we know all the answers or have our shit figured out, because we don't, right? And we're here kind of learning in the same way, exactly like you just laid out, right, as anybody else. It's just that we might have an ability through training to look at it in a different way, or analyze it in a different way, or pull meaning from it in a different way. And so that's the part that I hope to give people, is like, my experience isn't exactly yours, and I don't know, your path, but here's some takeaways that you might not have thought about because you don't have that training, right? I also think that for me, it was really important to bring the depth psychological piece into this too, because that is what I feel is the biggest missing component to so much of the healing work that's going on. And that's kind of become a little commodified in today's like social media wellness world, is that we've really lost touch with, and not just recently, we've had our touch lost for generations with what we would call this like more numinous aspect of the human experience, this experience of tapping into that which cannot be named, and allowing that to be part of our process. We are a culture that prizes itself on and really pedestalizes logic and very linear thinking, and we've really taken a lot of the mystery out of life and out of the soul's journey. And, we dismiss synchronicities, and we do a lot of these things because it doesn't feel safe to us, because the more feminine way of living in this world is to be, again, that can't be named, right? It's fluid, it's creativity, it's intuition, it's these things that you can't pinpoint. And so depth psychology really is the psychology of the soul. It is a psychology that rolls around explicitly in that. And this healing journey that all of us are on, that consistently all of us will be on, you will, to your point, go through these experiences where you will struggle and you will come out the other side. Now, biologically, you will always continue to grow and age, but psychologically, spiritually, will you evolve? That's not a guarantee, right? So you have to actually put the work into being with these hard experiences, and again, like rolling around in them and unpacking them and kind of living in that uncomfortable liminal space and that darkness that it brings, in order to really come out the other side a little bit more evolved, or a little bit more like, oh, this was the meaning behind it. And I think a lot of us struggle to do that. We either, number one, skip too quick to the meaning making, that we actually kind of skip over the pain and the struggle that's required, or we do the opposite, which is like we brush right over it because our culture doesn't really give us language for it. Again, we keep growing biologically, but we haven't really evolved spiritually in the process.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot I could go deeper with you on there, and I'd like to. I want to back up though, and I want to understand, how did you get to where you're at, right? I mean, even just this idea of depth psychology, and the idea that there's, because this is also something I've been seeing a lot in just the way in which we hold things, and the grip that we have on them, and sort of the counterintuitive importance of loosening that grip and allowing for the synchronicity and for spirit, or whatever you call it, to give, right? The idea of receiving, and making room to receive, is something that I'm trying to pay more attention to, right? Because in today's society, it's so easy to be busy, right? And to be distracted and miss the opportunities for the synchronicity and for the depth and for the receiving. So
That's right.
There's a lot there. That for me, being aware of that idea, or being open to it, and trying to shift into being it is something that I'm grappling with, or starting to play with at age 50. So we all get here one way or another. So let's back up, and I want to know, like, from the beginning, like, tell me about kind of how you came into the world and what your early childhood was like, your family dynamics. Tell me about kind of that very early part that might have informed your journey.
Yeah. I mean, as somebody who didn't find my way into therapy until I was about 25, was really the first time ever that I started unpacking some of that and started connecting those dots and making those connections, right? I grew up with a single mom, and, struggled financially. She was young when she had me, and was kind of, well, not kind of, was in a pretty like enmeshed relationship, which is what you would kind of expect for a young mom when it's just you and her. Pretty enmeshed, pretty codependent. I was definitely what we would call a parentified child. I think I got most of my sense of self and my sense of belonging from being the caretaker and being the one that kind of kept the boat from rocking and made sure that I did my best to keep her as stress-free as I could. And, I was really more focused on her experience than my own experience for a lot of my childhood. And that's pretty common. I mean, I will say in my therapy program, we had to read this book, all of us did, and it was called The Drama of the Gifted Child. And it speaks to the kind of personality structure or childhood structure that lends itself to people who then become healers, if you will. And we came back in after reading this book, and the teacher said, there was 30 of us. How many of you guys saw yourselves in this book? And all 30 of us raised our hands, right? It's a pretty typical structure of being raised, to be able to want to hold space for other people. And so cut to being 18, I have a much younger brother and sister. I was 10 when he was born. And so that put a lot of pressure on me because I was kind of the stand-in babysitter, and I resented the hell out of it.
Can I just interject for 1 second before you cut too far forward? Because I would like to just unpack that a little bit with you. Some of what you shared, I was curious if that's what you learned as you started to get into your career path and doing the work that you have to do to be a therapist. Separate that from like the lived experience of the kid, right? So did you know what you were doing was being more caretaker as a child, parentified child? What were you aware of? What was it like? Yeah, tell me a little more about like who you were as a kid.
I think that's the shared experience of a lot of parentified children. Overachiever, perfectionist. I was angry a lot. I was resentful a lot. I've always been a more extroverted person, so I wasn't shy. I didn't have any struggles with making friends or anything like that. That was just kind of part of my nature. But for sure, most of my childhood was spent, kind of walking on eggshells, again, trying to keep the peace in the home. I think that was a pretty felt experience, even when I didn't have the language for it. But I do know that there was a lot of, again, resentment and a lot of just kind of feeling unseen and feeling like the only way that I would be seen was by, having the straight A's and being the good girl and doing the right thing. And yes, mommy, no, mommy, what do you need, mommy? That kind of thing. Again, not having the language for it, of course, until you go into therapy and you start unpacking it. But that is the kind of felt experience of what it's like to be that child, which is, you're not loved for who you are. You're loved for what you can do. You're loved for what you can achieve. You're loved for the things that you're able to accomplish, right? So that is very visceral. I mean, that then obviously stays with you, again, having language for it. But the not really being accepted for who you are is something that just hangs, I think, over you, your whole life, if that's really the way that your childhood kind of sets you up.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I am curious about, the work that you've done, the healing that you've done, the work that you do. And yet, that last comment, which is that it hangs over your whole life, right? And I recently, in doing some deep work on my own, continue to see stuff from my childhood to the point that I was like, God, really? And then through, some work with the facilitator, it was like, yeah, really. And like, maybe really like for a long time, and like, yes, but, it's something that might hang over you. And I don't mean that from the standpoint of like, you can't live your life but it can seep in. Right. And it's fascinating,
It impacts the way you relate. Mm-hmm.
Which is like, I think it just really speaks to the importance of those years.
Yeah. And here's what I will say though, Brett. I mean, I would say that the first 5-8 years of my therapy was really unpacking so much of that and how that impacted me as an adult relating to other people. The part that I see as a therapist now is that so many of us get stuck there and we continue kind of making it other people's faults that we are the way that we are, rather than taking the information. There's going to be a period of like, oh, that was messed up. Or like even a period, I say this to clients all the time, like, be angry. Like sometimes we try to skip over that. Like if you're in a place of being mad that parent A or parent B did X, like fine, like be in that anger and allow yourself to be there and kind of work with it. But if we're 30 years down the road and that's still like your reason for all of these things that are happening in your life, like that's a different kind of conversation. And I do think that some therapeutic, I don't know if it's therapeutic approaches again, or if it's more just like the pop psychology ification, I'll make that word up, of psychology has kind of gotten us into this kind of gross place where it's very like victimhood. And that I don't actually get behind. I look at my upbringing very differently now, where I'm at now and the work that I've done past that initial unpacking phase where of course, I'm still activated. My mother and I have a, pretty complicated relationship, as I think a lot of us do. But so much of my work in the last 5+ years, and I would say even more so since becoming a mother myself, has been around seeing her for the absolute messy, incomplete, imperfect human that she is, because so am I. And it's not about that whole trope like, well, she did the best she could with what she had. I mean, yes, that's true, right? And also she still did things that were hurtful. But it's just more about going, okay, this was the hand of cards that I was dealt. What am I going to do with it? Right? So it's a lot less a blame space and a lot more of like a compassion space where I feel a lot of compassion towards her and what she experienced that led her to be who she was. And again, that didn't really click for me probably until I had my own kid.
Yeah, it's one of these things that it isn't an automatic. You're right, because there is a lot of victimhood. And I find that to be sad, because it's just not really helping anybody, right? Doesn't help the parent or the child, right? It's like you said, you just get stuck. But it is shocking how much the lived experience gives you the insight of understanding and hopefully compassion, right? It doesn't change everything, but man, I know for me, it was like, especially as my father got sick and towards the end of his life, and we started to really have like some good conversations about what happened. And, I just knew, like, as a parent, right, as a father, as somebody who was, growing a business and navigating marriage and all the things, you're like, yeah, I kind of get it, and like, I definitely believe in they did the best they could. And like, also like, well, I mean, you definitely, could have done better, right? But you didn't for a reason. So you did the best you could. But like, I have some sense as to how you got there. Mm-hmm. And you don't really, I don't know that you can get that, like a lot of things, until you really are doing it yourself.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And again, this isn't to take responsibility for bad behavior off of the person's shoulders who, did the bad behavior. It's also like this idea that we're not responsible for what happened to us, right? But we are responsible for what we do with the wounding. And I think it's that. I think it's like, to your point, it doesn't help either person. But if you're the person who has actually been victimized, this idea of being able to turn it around and say, okay, what am I going to do with this? Because this was in fact the card I was dealt. It shouldn't have been, we'll say air quote, shouldn't have been, but it was, right? And so now what? And I think that transition into now what do I do with it? Maybe even going back to our beginning conversation with like the kind of people who are out there trying to help the world, right? Or in some way you're tending to your corner of the globe, which is something Jack Kornfield says often. I think that is the moment where you start to transmute the pain. So rather than live in the pain, you transmute the pain, right? What are you doing with it? It becomes the fuel. It becomes the art. It becomes the compassion for other people. It becomes whatever it is. But that I feel like is oftentimes the point that people either get stuck or maybe the work kind of stops. And at least from my perspective, these depth psychology, spiritual psychology, Jungian psychology is the place where we say, okay, we understand who we are, why we are. We've got the behavioral aspect done. Okay, I can pay attention. I can set boundaries. I can get better at communication, like all these behavioral things. But then I've got to pull out and make kind of a larger meaning out of my soul's trajectory here, right? Otherwise, you hit a wall and it kind of goes flat. And so I don't know. I mean, I think for me that was the important transition, right? So around that 8-year mark of therapy, I started going, okay, here's the facts. This is what I felt when I was in it. But now what? What do I do with it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, which is, I think, again, you're right. Coming back to the earlier conversation, because when people get stuck. And I think most people that aren't going into the profession or aren't getting the help that they need or are getting help, but it's not really getting to the depth of things. This is where the systematic generational shoulds and patterns and, the systems just keep moving on and kind of getting more and more dug in. And it's where we start to see addiction and, perpetual poor behavior. So, let's back up. You're into your teenage years. You're being overachiever. I'm good, right? Look at me, looking for attention. Trying to. I think what it sounds to me like you're trying to find yourself. Like you're a kid. You're in this situation and you're doing the best you can and trying to navigate it. And this is a way that somewhere you learned maybe works. So what do you do with that? How does that play out, as you start to move through your teenage years and whatever happens next?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it looked like a lot of running. So at 18, I left and never looked back, right? I didn't want anything to do with colleges in my area. I went to high school in Syracuse. And so because I went to undergrad for communications, the number of people in my lifetime that have said, you didn't go to SU? And I was like, I didn't even apply. Like I had to get the hell out, right? So I left the state, I went to college, and I would say I'm the only person in my family actually that left and never went back. So, just kind of tells you like the tie to where everybody kind of stays, everybody comes back, everybody stays there. And I didn't. I always kind of felt like the black sheep of the family in the sense that I was always questioning things. I was always looking at things in a way that was like, well, you say that's how it's supposed to be, but I just call bullshit on it, and I always had a little bit of that perspective. Like I felt a bit like an odd man out in my family. And so I went to college in Boston. I did 5 years there. I was still a very overachiever. I went to a school that was specifically a co-op school. I went to Northeastern so that I could get a co-op and get a job. And everything was all about the future, the future, the future. And I was very kind of in the future constantly, right? And then cut to moving to New York, getting my career. I was in advertising for a long time in New York City as a producer. And I was just, here I am again, like wherever you go, there you are, right? So I'm just kind of unhappy. And I didn't think I was until one of my best friends at the time, I remember this, I was probably 24 or 25, said to me, you're just always so angry. Why do you think that is? And I was like, what? Oh, me? What do you mean? I was so, confronted by that because I didn't see myself in that way. I'm very grateful for her to kind of had be brave enough to say that, brave and kind enough to say that actually. So anyway, I started my own therapy about 25, and that was really just what cracked me open. And I say a lot of times too, that there's this process of like following breadcrumbs that I believe a lot of us have to get more comfortable with, because I'm sure you've experienced this too. say I'm on level C, I want to be able to see what is coming up with X, Y, and Z. And you're like, no, you're on C. The only thing you should be able to see is D. That's what you're looking for is D. Stop trying to see what comes, a year, 5 years, 10 years on the road, whether that's at work, whether that's in your healing journey, whether that's in your relationships. And that's how I lived most of my life. And so when I had to kind of step back, I started saying to myself, first of all, get in my body. That was a huge component for me. So most of my spiritual and psychological work came through learning how to be embodied. So I was in therapy, but I had also started yoga and mindfulness meditation at the same time, right? And I always say that my doorway to my spirituality was through my body, through connecting to my body, because I wasn't. Most of us aren't. Most of us live neck up in this society. So I started going, okay, well, what does the feeling of aliveness feel in my body? And I started kind of honing in on the feeling of aliveness. That was always like my barometer. And I would say, okay, well, yoga gives me a feeling of aliveness. Maybe I'll do a teacher training. Cool. And then I was like, well, this idea of yoga therapy gives me a sense of aliveness. Maybe I'll do that training. Nutrition, maybe I'll do that training. And I just started I was working full time, but I was kind of taking these other things. And I was saying I wanted to fill up that cup, that spiritual cup that, connecting to the self, if you will. Was in a relationship for a long time in New York that, ended up being one of my greatest teachers, but obviously we're no longer together. And that was really what exploded my brain into the world of Al-Anon. And so I worked a lot of the steps in Al-Anon, and I was in Al-Anon for a very long time. And that kind of overlapped with me deciding I wanted to go to grad school and kind of change my entire life. And here we are on the other side of that. And the idea of codependency and the way that we are a codependent society has really become one of the things that I talk the most about. And again, going back to what you were saying earlier, I wouldn't have been there if I hadn't lived through it and continue to live through it on my own journey. Even at 41, I'm still acting out some of those childhood wounds around needing to be perfect and needing to do everything right. And this is how you love me if I pretend that I'm this person that you need me to be. And so it just, it's a consistent cycle of coming back to those wounds as we work through them in relationships.
Wow. Interesting. I like the breadcrumb idea. I kind of refer to it as like this mosaic, that is our lives and how, one thing can really lead to the next. And, if you're following the breadcrumbs, if you're putting the pieces of the mosaic, into place that over time, it can really look beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is where the spirit and the depth, start to come in, because it's like, wow, you could really never have drawn that line, from the start, right? That, you're going to go into advertising in New York City, and then this, whatever, however, all the things you haven't said, but I can imagine about how you met even your friend, right? Your friend calls you out, right? Like, I don't know the origin story of you meeting your friend, right? But it's like an awe thing. Like, if you really back up, you're like, and the power that of what one person might say to you that changes the entire trajectory of your life, right? And then, you end up in this relationship. And I mean, this is the thing that like, I'm learning everything that I'm sharing. I'm learning, like real time. But I also have young adult kids. And so I'm watching them, and I'm blessed enough to be close with them and really be able to have good conversations about their lives. They're at like such an amazing age. It's so fun, even though it's hard on them, right? But they're like in college, and now they're in their early careers, and they're grappling with stuff, a tough boss, a breakup, a first love, whatever, and you try to tell kids things that, they can't really understand. Like, when the girl, breaks your heart, it's like, well, it's just the first one, and it's, and you're going to learn so much from this, and you're going to be so much, right? So when as it comes to you, like this relationship, right? And was the relationship what got you into Al-Anon, or was that from your childhood? relationship, right?
Yeah, no, that was my relationship until I realized that it was also my childhood. But that was the qualifier, right? That originally got me in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so like painful, I'm sure, but like what you then got to see in Al-Anon, right? That now informs the way in which you work. You know, it's like you would never wish that upon somebody, but like, you know, the embodied experience again in the body, if you don't feel it, if you don't get to live it, if you don't know it, you probably don't end up where you are.
No. And, there are people out there. I mean, look, we live in a time with social media where everybody's an expert, right? And because of, I think, maybe the work that I've done and maybe the embodiment piece, I find that my spidey sense or kind of my radar is pretty sharp for people who are talking at you, but haven't actually experienced or gone through what they're talking about. Like they're regurgitating information, or they're very neck up, or it feels very preachy, or it's like, here's the right way to do something. Here's the wrong way to do something. It's very black and white. I can call that stuff out pretty quickly. And there's an immediate kind of aversion almost in my body to those type of people, right? And I think it's what you're speaking to, which is there's a difference in the way you feel in the presence of somebody who is talking at you versus somebody who is saying, I'm not the expert on your life, but what I can do is walk beside you, give you whatever knowledge I have that was helpful to me, and then you get to do what you want to do with it, because ultimately, you're an autonomous being and you get to choose your path. That's a very different way of approaching working with and helping people. And I don't know, I guess, like, to repeat myself, I have an aversion to the people who do the other thing, which is like finger wag, like, let me tell you what you're supposed to do,
Yeah. Well, that's sort of a whole nother subject, because at least you have the skill set to be able to notice that, unfortunately, most people don't. So there are a lot of, kind of people that aren't walking the walk and professing to know things and guide people. And yeah.
Like, I would love to know the truth. Please, please, please do share. I'm sure all of us would love to know the truth.
Yeah. Right. Where you're probably more in the camp of like, the only truth is that you don't know the truth.
Amen.
Right. Okay. So tell me, because I am curious, as you go through all of these kind of credentialed things, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, okay, I'm going to be a teacher trainer, and then, I'm going to bring the therapy in, and then, this and that, and right. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, back to the comment about how like we might still have these childhood wounds that continue to maybe unconsciously get into the driver's seat throughout our lives. Now, like, do you start to be the high achiever in this lane? Like how are you separating this adult self, that's really following breadcrumbs, a calling, and maybe allowing for the achieving part of you to have a healthy place, or did it, or does it still? Mm-hmm. And being a good mom, or right, getting back, does it still kind of find its way in? And how did that inform your work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a yes and, right? It's like, of course, it's kind of always there. I don't know that I really believe in the concept of ever being like healed, air quote, or like fixed, right? I think that we develop different relationships to these parts of ourselves and to these experiences, and we continue to evolve. But do we ever totally fix them? No, because we wouldn't be who we were if we totally fix them. Like I would not be myself if I wasn't in some way always thinking about how to get ahead, or what can I do? Or, I get this like obsessive way where I'm able to see kind of larger picture strategy, poke holes in things and kind of put things together. And that can borderline on some obsessive thinking. And then I get into these holes, but like, it's not good enough, and perfectionism. But I also wouldn't be who I was without some of that, right? So I'll use the example of like obviously John, who John and I are so opposite in so many ways. And in a lot of ways, it's complementary because John is the very like build the bus while driving it kind of person. He's like, he doesn't have anything figured out and he'll just do it anyway and he'll figure it out while he's going. That makes me so anxious to even think about, right? Like I need like very drawn blueprints and I need it all stamped and signed before I start. And I will say in the years we've been together, I mean, God, almost 8 years at this point, the way that we pull from each other, right? Where like he will sometimes slow down and like think about things first before you jump. And then sometimes I'm like, fuck it, right? Like I don't have it figured out, but I'm just going to leap and then I know the net will appear, right? And so I mean, even in the way that I chose a partner who was so different than me, I realize now is an example of how we are always striving to just keep working on these parts of ourselves, right? And part of that is through relationship. It's like I chose somebody who would mirror back to me, so that I can constantly be looking at it and attempting to rewrite that story a little bit or make peace with it, right? Embrace that part of myself, celebrate that part of myself that I used to hate. So no, it's never gone fully. That's why I say it's a yes and, but of course it still gets me into trouble. But I think again, putting in the reps of God, almost 20 years of doing introspective work has given me the ability. What doesn't happen now is I don't get so caught up in it that a week goes by before I'm aware of it. It's like I get caught up in it and it might be in a moment and then I'm like, woo, pump the brakes. You're being a little much. There's a little bit of perfectionism happening, right? Or you're beating yourself up or you're self-critical or whatever that stuff is. And I can catch it a lot quicker. Whereas before, when I wasn't conscious of it, it was running the show. So I think that maybe is like the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get that. I mean, I think that maybe is like the work is just how fast can you catch it and ground yourself, right? And the faster that gap gets, the smaller it gets, the faster you do that, that's the mastery, right? That's the work, and what you're after is just catching it. So tell me, so you go into this field,
Mm-hmm.
and how did because you talked a little bit about, what you don't like about traditional therapy or, being adverse to some of the shit that you see in the, guru self-help world, right? So tell me a little bit about kind of how your work evolved from when you got started into the field to where you are today, right? And this can kind of bring us back to the motherhood piece. And I do want to talk a little bit more about the depths and the spirit, but like, tell me what your experience, whatever you want to share about what informed your experience of shifting through the work to get to where you're at with it today.
Yeah. I mean, I think a big piece of it, I was self-sufficient, right? Like I don't have family money. I wasn't in a lot of people that came into my school were, married and they were older in their lives. And so they had these support systems and I didn't really have that. So I was working full time in advertising while I was in grad school for a big part of it. And even the way that I chose the school that I chose, I knew that I was looking for something, but I wasn't quite sure what. And I had done a lot of research on all the different schools, and I was visiting schools. I was still in New York at the time, visiting all these schools in New York. And my therapist at the time said, there's this school in California that I think you should look at. I feel like it would really resonate with you. And this was back in the day of real pamphlets, real brochures. And she handed me one, and it was for Pacifica, which is where I ended up going, but at the time didn't know. And I took a trip out to California by myself. My, at the time, fiance was not super happy about that. I think he might have seen the writing on the wall. And I had this week by myself out there, and I saw some friends, and I looked at 2 schools actually in California. And I remember when I got out of my car on campus of Pacifica where I went, I had this full body like experience where I welled up with tears. Kind of like the hairs on my arms stood up, and I just like, I had this feeling of like, oh, this is it. Like, this is where I need to be, right? Without even having gone in for the day.
And you were how old?
I was 30, give or take. I think I was about 30, 31, something like that. And I just had this knowing, and I've had only a couple of those in my life, and that was one of the first. And or I'm sure I've had more, but I wasn't aware of them at the time, right? And so I was aware of this one. And anyway, ended up on the trajectory. The school was very different than what I'd ever experienced. It was again very spiritual in nature. It's a Jungian program. It was all about kind of incorporating working with the unconscious and dream and metaphor. And it threw me in the deep end. It made me very uncomfortable for a long time. And I was in between these worlds of like left brain, New York City advertising. And then I'd get thrown into these experiences for, a weekend or a week at a time. And anyway, I ended up after a year or two in, I had to leave my job and I ended up kind of packing some bags and leaving the relationship and trekking across the country by myself and starting my life over again. And I didn't know where I would end up as far as like what the trajectory of the career was. I think at this moment, again, we're back at breadcrumbs. So I'm in my internship. I become a therapist in California. You have to do 3,000 supervised hours. I'm working with clients. I'm working with adolescents, which is what I thought I wanted to do. And it became really clear quickly that I did not want to have a private practice where I sat with one-on-one clients all day long. A lot of my colleagues were like, I love this. I'm so into it. And I just was like, this is not doing it for me. I like the work, but this is not it. Hindsight, I know I'm very extroverted and being with one person in that way is actually very draining to me after a while. But honestly, I give John a lot of credit because it was through meeting John where he was kind of already experimenting and doing things a little out of the box, where he started pushing me out of my comfort zone and saying, run an online group, do an online program. And once I started running groups, I started feeling that like, oh, this is it. Like, this is where I'm really meant to be. This is kind of the sweet spot for me. It would fill me up in a way that I didn't really get from my individuals. So, there's not like a straight line. Again, even that part of my story is more about just like feeling into, this doesn't quite fit. Oh, this does. Oh, this doesn't quite fit. Oh, this does. And just pivoting. I always say it's like taking the experience, taking the information, and then pivot. Take it in and then pivot, right? And eventually making my way to where I'm at now, which is, I've now published 2 books, one obviously co-authored with John. And, I have an online community and I have a coaching academy where I train people in in-depth psychology. And I do all these different things. I'm spinning all these plates. But who knew when I first started going to grad school that was what it would end up as? I thought I'd end up with like a private practice,
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me a little bit about group because, this is something, it's funny, the word group, I've talked about this quite a bit, but when I was in middle school, maybe I was in high school, I think I was in early high school, I got put into something called group. Literally, it was called group. And it was group therapy. We just didn't know that's what it was, right? And like they would plant like some kids that were troublemakers, and it was like so you didn't really know, but I loved it. It was like my favorite part of high school, and I have been blessed with being a part of a number of groups, peer groups, whatever. Still am. I'm actually starting to facilitate some group stuff, and there's something, call it community, communal. I mean, even I think the AA groups, right? There's something really powerful about group. And it's interesting to hear you talk about how that lit you up when you stepped into it. And I'm just kind of curious to hear your take on group and the importance of having shared experience and I mean, not that there isn't a place for a one-on-one, because, I still get a lot of that too. But I am kind of curious to hear your perspective on the added value or the differentiated value of the group experience.
Yeah, I look at group as, first of all, I love group. And I look at group work as essentially like the lighter fuel underneath the individual experience. And so what I find is the most effective is, especially when you're really in the work and you're like working through some heavy stuff, is being in your individual work and then supplementing it also with some group work. And here's why. In the individual work, you're in a bit of a silo, right? It's important. You're getting the mirrored back. Hopefully you have a therapist or a coach that calls you out on stuff, is able to see you and hold you at the same time, but again, challenge you too. And then what happens is you're working it out. You're having these ahas. Holy shit, I didn't know this. I had these revelations. And then you take it into group. What happens is you see yourself in other people. You hear other people telling your story and you go, oh my God, I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. I'm not broken. I'm not fucked up, right? So there's this immediate sense of releasing shame, which you can't actually do the work on the patterns and the habits and the things about yourself that you want to do the work on if there's shame involved. You can't. Shame is like the stop, right? It's like the block to actually getting in there and doing the work. And so what happens when you come into a group setting and you see yourself, you hear yourself reflected back at you and other people, is that shame goes away. And there becomes this like camaraderie of like, oh my God, me too. Right. So number one, that's a huge component to group work. The second part of it also is that as human beings, we're kind of obsessed with this concept of being seen and the importance of being seen. I'm a little iffy on that concept because I think a lot of what we're doing right now culturally is putting a lot of parental dynamics on adult relationships and wanting our adult relationships to heal some of our parental wounds. Your parents should have seen you, yes, and it's great when your adult relationships can see you, but it's not actually always their job to see you. So I'll use the word witnessed instead. As a human being, it's actually really important to be witnessed in your becoming, in your trajectory, in your work, in your journey, right? So it gives you a sense of community, to use that word like you did. It gives you a sense of belonging. It gives you a sense of, again, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. And it gives you a sense of like my experience is valid and real in the process of being witnessed. And so I had a lot of people, the codependency recovery group that I've been leading weekly since like 2020, the number of people that have come into that group and have said, oh, my therapist told me about this group. My therapist recommended that I take this group is laughable to me. And I love it, right? There's so many therapists that must follow me on Instagram and are like, you need to be in this girl's group. You're pretty codependent, you know? And I'm like, sweet, bring it on, you know? But that's kind of how I see it. And that's why I love it so much. I think it's so important, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just kind of following the threads here too, and breadcrumbs, because I'm rereading what is it? Codependent No More.
Melanie Beattie. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Melanie Beattie, who I have like done all the daily readers, and so I was reading Liz Gilbert's book, All the Way to the River, and then she mentions codependency. I know, right? Oh, it was good. It's so good. I just was really moved by that book
Same.
for so many wonderful, amazing reasons. And so this does kind of come back to the shame, right? And the sharing, right? And like what she does so powerfully, and what you do with Motherhood Myth is you're bringing your honest self into the light, you're sharing, and in doing that, you are allowing for a lot of other people to not be so shamed and so othered, and this is the system. And so I think, you know, you're answering the question about group, right, in a way that does speak to the depth, right? And the spirit and the connectedness and the community. And for me, like that is a part of like the oneness, right? And so these groups and the sharing of your life and the debunking these myths, and it seems to all be so interwoven. I don't know. I'm not sure. Well, I guess maybe the question really is like, how did you come to this? I mean, obviously, you know, you have your daughter, right? You become a mother. You start to have your own experiences, right? Maybe weaving those two together. You know, maybe putting a little bit of a bookmark in the whole communal experience and the shame piece, and kind of pivoting into the specific, your experience. Talk a little bit about then, you know, what you went through that allowed you to then put this work together and share it.
Yeah, I think it was definitely some questioning around. I remember early days. First of all, my daughter was born, and then 2 weeks later we went to lockdown. So it was a very isolating experience to have a baby right as COVID started. And I remember so many conversations with one of my best girlfriends being like, this cannot possibly be how we are supposed to parent. Like, this cannot be it. It should not be this hard, right? Tell me I'm not crazy. Like, this is what I'm experiencing, right? Like, please tell me. And the number of mothers that I had that conversation with in the beginning days, and realizing that everybody had the same experience. Everybody was asking the same questions. And so then I was also, I was watching the actual parenting process and asking those questions, but then I was seeing how the parenting was impacting the relationship, right? The relational process. And again, I was going, I know we're not the only ones. There's no way we're the only ones struggling with this. And so I just started asking those questions again, like I can't be the only one. And I guess again, because of the work that I do, I am more inclined to say, hey, here's what I'm experiencing. You too? Like I'm not as shameful about it because I do know that sharing it takes that out of it, right? And I think just another piece of this too, and I do believe that our children choose us. And I swear I never wanted children. I'll just say that. I never wanted children. I never wanted to get married. And so here I am with both. And I remember when I decided, and even in the way that happened, it was a knowing that I had, to use that term, when I thought to myself, I was deep in meditation in a 3-day retreat, and I had this knowing of like, oh, I want to do this with him, with John. And I remember in that moment, I knew I was going to have a girl. I wasn't pregnant yet. There was nothing even on the horizon, but I knew I was going to have a daughter. And there's something for me as a woman in the family that I come from, which is mostly women, very women heavy, where I feel like having a daughter was, to use that term again, almost like the lighter fuel. It was like the fire underneath my ass to go, it's time to heal this shit. Enough is enough. It just became so obvious to me that the way that we were struggling, I was struggling with mothering, we were struggling as partners and as parents. And I was like, I'm done with this cycle. It ends here. Like the self-abandoning, the codependency, the way that I've been raised to live, not just by my family of origin, but societally, right? This is bullshit. It's not working and no one's questioning it because we just keep doing it and saying, well, this is just what it looks like. And I was just somebody going, I call bullshit on it. And so I think that was really the moment or moments for me where I thought something's got to be done about this. Like we've got to have these conversations differently and we've got to change course.
Yeah. And yet, it's really hard.
Oh my God, it's hard every day. It's still hard.
Right. Because, I was thinking, when you mentioned COVID and the isolation, just knowing my wife, share when our kids were little and she had left her work. She was a teacher and she was a really well-loved teacher. The kids, the parents, they loved her. She was like one of those teachers that just was like really loved, and I'm biased, but like, the difference, when there's like the teacher everybody loves, wants to have, right? She was that person and she felt that. And then, she had our sons and lonely, and she always did want to be a mother. She really, was excited to be a mother, and it was still lonely and hard. Right. And by the way, I didn't understand or appreciate that at all. And Katie listens to every podcast. So yeah, sorry, honey, for not understanding at all.
It wasn't your felt experience and no one was talking about it.
Oh yeah. And I was 26.
And you were 26. That's right.
Right. And like totally lost and confused and, dealing with all sorts of my own shit. Right. So, even when you say, I didn't want to be a mother, I didn't want to get married, like these are things people don't say. These are things you're not supposed to say. Women are really not supposed to say that.
I know. And Brett, here's one of the ones that I say a lot that I get a lot of like eyebrow raises from. I say even now, I love my daughter. I do not love the act of parenting. They're very different things. I love this little being. I love her with every fiber of my being, but I don't like being a parent. I don't like the constant process of making lunches and dinners. I don't like the wiping of the butts. I don't like all of that stuff, right? And I've had so many women come to me and be like, thank you for saying that, because I thought it made me a bad mother that I was separating the two out, right? And I'm like, why? Why does that make me less of a mother by saying, of course I love my kid, but I don't want to do drop off and pick up every day for the rest of my life. Like I'm not the Pinterest mom. I don't cut my kids' sandwiches out with star-shaped cookie cutters. Like I'd rather gouge my eyes out. No shame to people who do that. It's just not who I am. And I have to be the one that's leading the charge and saying to other people, like, you don't have to look a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way, prove yourself in a certain way, check all these boxes in order to be a good mom, a good wife, a good woman, a good sister, all this nonsense. It's all or nothing. It's either that or you're shit. It's like, that's ridiculous. Like, it's time for us to start rewriting our own stories, you know?
Okay. So I want to bring this kind of full circle, because I do want to just like go a little bit deeper with you on this piece where it's like, you know, you gave John some credit for how you started to rethink about therapy, right? You talked about how you two are different, right? You talked about your overachieving and sort of the perfectionist child in you. I'm still like, it feels to me like you're really like coming into your own, still like stepping into your full power and kind of figuring out where you are being sort of rebellious and you are not being the perfectionist and you are actually being a bit of a risk taker and an outlier, right? By saying these things, which are actually really a part of your core, right? And this is kind of why I enjoy the podcast, is because it does sort of seem to really, when you're doing it right, when people are having success, like you are, right? You've figured out how to pull it all together into, right? Your whole life experience has come to serve you to be the human being that you are, right? Which is all of these things, right? It's bringing the good parts of the past into it and seeing where they serve you and where they don't, and seeing the parts that were maybe not honored and learning to honor them, right? And so you've kind of like, you know, sort of pulled it all together for now, at least. It'll continue to evolve, right?
Ask me tomorrow. Who knows?
No, but it'll grow. It'll expand.
Sure.
It's going to continue to expand. But I guess, you know, where I'm pretty energized is just this idea that it doesn't have to be one way. And so, like, you know, you guys moved to Costa Rica and you're, you know, playing with, you know, what kind of life you can live there and how that's different.
Yeah.
You're playing with how to be a mom in a way that isn't how you were raised or how a lot of people say you're supposed to do it. I mean, there are a lot of myths, to use your word, a lot of, you know, kind of systematic stories that you are committed to, you know, not living into just because.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, it's hard, right? I mean, I think it's easier actually to just put our head down and do what we're told, even if internally it doesn't feel easier. I think a lot of times for most of us, it's easier just to go along to get along. The path of questioning and the path of trying to do it different is actually the harder path. But it's far more rewarding, in my opinion.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing. And I certainly know that it's making a huge impact on mothers and a lot of women. I love the fact that you're doing it in group. And I think writing a book is a way to build a community, right? Mm-hmm. And yet, you know, you're actually doing it, you know, with virtual communities. I think it's really powerful, but I think it's, you know, for me, also really just a great example of the power of using your voice and your truth and being vulnerable and sharing yourself in a way, despite the fact that it might be scary and lonely. There's probably a lot more people out there feeling the same way and needing you to step forward. So anyway, I just appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate you taking time to come on the podcast and go a little bit deeper with me.
I appreciate it, Brett. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for reaching out. This was a great conversation. Honestly, I haven't had to do that in a long time where I've had to go like, oh my God, we're going there. We're going all the way back. I was like, shit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I know. It's one of the things that I actually feel like is good about, what happens here. And I say that like humbly, but I whenever somebody says like, shit, I haven't talked about that in a long time or right, thought about that in a long time, that seems to be important. So anyway, any final thoughts, anything else that you want to share with the audience? We'll put all the where to find you in the show notes, but just anything that you want to leave our audience with.
Yeah. I mean, I think in general, right, it's like I was saying, I think we're in a really interesting time in history where we have so much information at our fingertips and we get to decide what we're going to do with it. And for me, and for a lot of people I know out there that resonate with my work, what I'm planning on doing with it is challenging the systems that have gone kind of unchecked for far too long. And so, I just hope that you see even the personal work, the personal journey in and of itself as an act of resistance. And then joining in community is even more of an act of resistance, because in general, we're a lot more controllable when we are in shame and when we feel lonely.
Yeah. Amen. Awesome. Well, give your husband a hug for me. And
I will.
thanks again. It's good to be with you.
Thank you, Brett.